Good morning, Chapel Lacrosse, and anybody else joining us for a Thursday morning Bible class. Today is one of my favorite Bible texts to study in the whole Bible, and it's not just one of my favorites. Genesis 22, the sacrifice of Isaac, is probably the most written about Old Testament passage in the history of the world. Old Testament passage, I think. In fact, in the Jewish tradition, it is, I think, number one. It's called the Akedah, which is Hebrew for the binding. Isaac was bound when he was going to be sacrificed. And I think the reason why this is the passage is this gets to the heart of God and tests. In fact, the text begins by saying God tested Abraham, gets to the core of what kind of God are you? We've already seen in these early chapters of God wrestling with evil and sin. You had the destruction of the world through the flood. You had God's heart being hurt before he destroyed the world. You have all the evil and wicked on the earth at that time. Then you have God calling Abraham, who's nothing special. And we've seen through this whole story so far, Abraham's sort of this piece of work. His wife is. They take God's promises into their own hands and sin with the whole Hagar situation and lying to their kings. And God, it's interesting how God is patient with them. And then here, God is testing Abraham through this whole process. Do you really believe my word? Luther has written extensively on this passage as well, and we'll make some notes about that. We could probably talk for weeks just on this one passage. So let's get into it. Genesis 22, one of the greatest, if not the greatest, Old Testament passage. So after these things, so what are these things? I would argue it's the whole Abraham story. It's the call of Abraham, the fact that he didn't go right away to the land of Canaan, stopped in Haran behind. It's the fact that God protected him from the 5 kings that Abraham ambushed after those 5 kings beat Sodom and Gomorrah and stole Lot away. It's how God protected them and provided for them during the famines, and even when they went to foreign kings and lived and sojourned in their area. It's how God worked through the sin of Sarah and Hagar, and how God did bless Hagar with a son Ishmael, and how yet God still promised another son only from Abraham and Sarah when they weren't able to have kids scientifically. So I'm all for the science. I think science is great. And there are times in life where science won't answer the question, just won't. Where the divine who created science can only answer the question. And I've seen that in my own life when a lady from our church walks into my office and shows me a picture and says, "What is this?" And I'm like, "I don't know, what is it?" And it's a picture of stage 4 cancer. And I said, "Okay, so what about it?" And it was her husband with stage 4 cancer, and they opened him up to remove the stage 4 cancer from his lungs to buy him 3 months, and it's gone. And she takes the report to 3 different oncologists, the top cancer doctors in the Midwest, and they all say the same thing: "I don't know. It was a miracle." Not one of them said that it was misdiagnosis. They all said, "I don't know. It's a miracle." So there are many places in the science and medical world where we can definitely point to science doesn't always have the answer. And again, it's not to say we have to pit science versus God. God created this science and scientific methods for us humans. Yeah, we learned about them, but we didn't invent gravity. We may have, God has allowed us to give us wisdom and inventors or scientists or medical professionals to discover truths that were already part of his creation. So God, sometimes only God knows, though, the answer. The divine is greater than the natural sciences, divine mystery. So God allows a 100-year man and a 90-year-old woman to conceive and bring forth a son, Isaac. And so Isaac's born, and if you remember correctly, the last part of the story is Isaac is weaned, And Ishmael starts making fun of Isaac, and Sarah's had enough, and they send Hagar and Ishmael away because there's definitely too much family drama. And sometimes that happens. There's sin that's happened, and even when people are trying to behave their best and get through things, you just need to separate for some time. So Ishmael and Hagar are separated, and then now we have this story. After these things, all the stuff is by name, and Abraham says, Hineni in the Hebrew, which is, here am I. And he says, take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. Gotta stop and pause there. This is so amazing. First of all, Isaac's not Abraham's only son, yet God calls him his only son, Yakid in the Hebrew, the only son. So why does God call Isaac the only son? He has Ishmael. There's two sons. It's because he's the only son of the promise. Ishmael was not promised by God. Ishmael's a blessing by God, but he was not the promised son. Isaac is the promised son. And he says, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering, and on one of the mountains which I shall tell you. So this second thing is God is now commanding child sacrifice. We can look to the prophets. He disdains human sacrifice, let alone child sacrifice. So what's God doing? Well, again, you have to read the first words. God tested Abraham. God never was going to allow this to happen. We know this, sort of like in the Job story. Job never knows why he's suffering. It's not like God said, hey, Job, I hate you. You didn't go to church. Boom, 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 and start causing all kinds of suffering. That didn't happen. But Job didn't know why. God allowed Job to lose everything and suffer simply because he took a bet with Satan. God allowed Satan to be judged, and in doing so, it cost Job a lot of pain and suffering. God's plans and God's ideas are so much higher than ours. They're always good, even though it doesn't always feel good for us down here. Here, God was never going to let Isaac be sacrificed because God doesn't ordain or believe in child or human sacrifice. So the question then becomes, why would God allow this to happen? Why would God do this if he never was going to do it? Let's wait to the end to talk about that. The language is much like when Jesus is baptized. When the Father speaks, this is my Son, my only begotten Son, in whom I love. And Luther points us out. This passage and the baptism of Jesus actually were two of the passages that allowed Luther, at the time a Catholic monk, who was really struggling with righteousness and why does God show love to some? Why does God show mercy to some? Or why does God show mercy at all? When Luther was struggling with the gospel, it was this passage, along with the baptism of Jesus, that really started to open the books of Romans and Galatians. Take your son, your only son Isaac, the only son of promise, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains which I shall tell you. I'm just going to break to the chase now because I can't hold this in. You can't just not talk about it. Why would God do this? Because God's going to do this with his son. That's the point. Nobody knows this yet. Abraham doesn't know this. Nobody in Old Testament times know this. And I don't think anybody really gets it until the cross, the crucifixion of God's own son. And when Jesus in John 3, in fact, talks about how he says, just as the serpent was lifted up, so the Son of Man, the bronze serpent from Numbers, just as that bronze serpent was lifted up and people looked to it and were saved, so the Son of Man will be lifted up and everyone who looks to him will be saved. And then Jesus says the famous John 3:16, for God so loved the world, not just his son, but the world, that he gave his only begotten son, his Yakid, his only son, so whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life. So this is all about, this passage has to be interpreted in light of the complete vision God has for humanity and eternity and eternal life and the gospel and his son being the Yechid son, the only son who will die and be the whole burnt offering for the sins of the world. So, so God just simply says, take your son, offer him as a burnt offering, an olah, a whole burnt offering, one that goes up for atonement. It's the only time God ever commanded an olah, a burnt offering, before Leviticus. Interesting. So Noah's sacrifices, those were, I think, the only other time in the Old Testament before Leviticus that a burnt offering, specifically a burnt offering, a blood sacrifice for atonement is offered up. And God did not command that one. Noah got off the ark and just offered up a whole olah, burnt offering. Verse 3, so Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, and took 2 of his young men with him, and his son Isaac. You know, I taught a Bible class once called Donkeys Leading Us to Jesus at Lutheran High. It's amazing to me the amazing amount of stories that happen with people getting up in the morning and saddling a donkey. But I guess it would be the same as he got in his car and turned it on and headed off to his journey. So here we have Abraham saddling the donkey. He takes 2 young men with him and his son Isaac. Could be 2 of Isaac's buddies. We don't know how they knew Isaac, but they're young men. Na'ur, which means a young lad, 13 or younger, which I've preached this recently about Samuel. When Samuel, Na'ur, a young lad, 13 or younger probably. And what else does Abraham do? He cut the wood for the burnt offering and arose and went to the place of which God had told him. On the 3rd day. Now, this is one of those passages, one of the reasons why we always talk about Jesus rising on the 3rd day. One is because Jesus makes mention of Jonah being spit out on the 3rd day, or being in the belly of the fish for 3 days and being coming out. So also somebody will be in the belly of the earth for 3 days. But also because of a passage like this. On the 3rd day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place from afar. So on the 3rd day, the women lift up their eyes, and when they see from afar, they see the stone rolled away. God is this beautiful author of this incredibly poetic and true story where everything in the Old Testament is pulling us forward to Jesus. Or as Dr. Wells would say, Jesus is the divine vacuum cleaner, sucking everything in the Old Testament, whether it's Isaac, the Yechid, you name it, Abraham, the promises, Moses, freedom from slavery, the words of the prophets, all suck up into Jesus. They're all revealed in Jesus, all of it. That's why I love this story, this history, this theology so much. It's all about Jesus. It's not just some random collection of books. It's not just some book written by some guy in a cave. The more you study science, the more you'll learn how complex our bodies and earth and universe are, and that this is not an accident. And the more you study the Bible altogether, the more you realize it's true. And that nobody could have made this stuff up. It's not an accident. It's not some random collection of stuff. Verse 4, on the 3rd day, Abraham lifted his eyes up and saw the place from afar. Verse 5, then Abraham said to his young men, stay here with the donkey. I and the boy will go over there and worship and come again to you. So tons of stuff has been written about this, the testing of Abraham. Imagine Abraham knowing what he's about to do. 3-day journey. You can just sort of vision Jesus knowing he was going to do on Monday, Thursday, which was Friday morning, being in the Garden of Gethsemane. Father, take this cup from me, but not my will, but thy will be done. Knowing what would happen, knowing that he would have to climb that hill, that mountain, carrying his own wood for the sacrifice of which he would be. Same thing with Abraham. He's got a 3-day journey. He's been given a command by God. He's not wavering from it at all. He wavered from the original command to leave his family and to go straight to the place he was supposed to go. He wavered in a lot of things. He's lied to kings about his wife, but not here. He's not wavering. We're on day 3, and now he leaves the 2 boys, and he takes Isaac. Verse 6, and Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son. So here's Isaac being a type meaning an Old Testament person, place, or thing that points us to a greater fulfillment in Jesus. So Isaac is a type of Jesus. He is, by the way, that word type is a Greek word typos, and actually Paul uses it in the book of Romans. I think he called Adam a type for Jesus, being a son of God, and how Jesus is the second Adam. I'd have to double check on that, but Paul does use the word typos for Jesus in the book of Romans. So here's Isaac carrying his own wood, just like Jesus does, right? And he took in his hand the fire and the knife. So they both went of them together. Verse 7. And Isaac said to his father Abraham, my father. And he says, here I am, son. He says, behold the fire and the wood, but where's the lamb for a burnt offering? So this boy is old enough to know there's something wrong. You got everything, but we don't have the lamb. So what are we going to do? Abraham says, verse 8, God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering, my son. So they both went them together. So the word Moriah is the word for the one who sees. And in the Hebrew, so in the English it says, God will provide. In the Hebrew, it actually says, God will see to it. In other words, he's going to see to that we have an offering for the whole burnt offering. But in the English, it's translated, he will provide. But the word Moriah gets its name from the one who sees. Just hold on to that thought. Verse 9, when he came to the place of which God had told him, Abraham built the altar there and laid the wood in order and bound Isaac. And there's the word bound Isaac. That's where the Jews get the name for this text, the binding of Isaac. I think in your text in English, it says the sacrifice of Isaac. But if you were a good Jewish boy or girl and celebrated bar mitzvah, you would have known the story, and you would know the story as the binding of Isaac. It's probably one of the most important, if not the most important, Sunday school Jewish stories you would have been told. So he bounds Isaac, and now you know Isaac's got to have some questions. He takes his son and lays him on the altar on top of the wood. Verse 10, then Abraham reached out his hand and took the knife to slaughter his son. The word slaughter, not just stab, not just kill, but slaughter. It's sacrificial language. He is slaughtering his son, probably to slit his throat, very gruesome thing. But verse 11, but the angel of the Lord, not just an angel, but the angel of the Lord, and this is the angel Lord that appears to Hagar in the wilderness and made promises to Hagar and to Ishmael. I think it's the first time in the Genesis story, along with the Hagar, that the angel Lord appears. This time, though, the angel Lord speaks not just as like a messenger angel, but as actually God. And this is very interesting. From here on out, the angel Lord will lead Israel out of Exodus, will lead Joshua into the promised land, and will talk not just like a messenger angel like Gabriel did to Mary and Joseph, but actually as God himself. And so this is pre-incarnate Jesus. So when you hear the angel Lord, just substitute the word Jesus, pre-incarnate, he had not been made human flesh yet by the will of God, conceived by the Holy Spirit, born of the Virgin Mary. That had not happened yet, but he existed. He's always existed. He's co-eternal with the Father and the spirits. And here he is in action in the Old Testament. So Jesus, I'm just going to say, Jesus calls to Abraham from heaven, Abraham, Abraham. And he says, here am I. The same thing he said at the beginning of the story, early in the morning when he was getting up. He says, do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God. Hold on to that thought, the fearing of God. Seeing you have not withheld your son, your Yaqid, your only son from me. And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and look, behold, behind him was a ram caught in a thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. So there's a substitute. It's another theological term. We learned this in our catechism classes, that Jesus was our substitute. Here, Isaac gets a substitute. So Abraham called the name of that place, the Lord will provide, or the Lord will see to it. As it is said today, on the mount of the Lord, on the mount of Yahweh, it shall be seen to, or it shall be provided. Now, there's a number of things to talk about. Feels like I'm losing my voice already. Number one, there's been much written about why would God do this? There's been much written about what was Abraham thinking? If you're ever going to question God, here's the time to question God, but he never questions God. And sort of the whole inner angst, the inner struggle that Abraham must have been going through for 3 days, and he even raised that knife. And then there's been much written about Isaac's perspective. I mean, he is the beloved son of his father. Their relationship had to have changed forever after this. But only Abraham and Isaac, if you think about it, can really get it to the point that they get it. Because only Isaac was commanded by God to be sacrificed. No other kid. God does not want anybody to be sacrificed. Sin in the Bible. And yes, I will say this. For those who would think abortion is okay, no, it's not. It's not about the choice of the woman. You could talk about many other cases. I'm not trying to downplay what women's going through. I think if most women saw what was growing within them, they would use their choice to keep the child. And the church needs to do a better job of loving people too. So the church has much sin in that dialogue, as the government or other people do as well. And we will do better as a church to convince people that it is life by loving people and speaking nice to people than otherwise. I'll say that much. But child sacrifice is number one. Read the prophets. Number one, no in God's list. Probably number 2 or 3 combined are lying and deceiving for the sake of gain and the ill reputation of others. That is a big one. And the taking advantage of widows and orphans. So those are the top sins. If you want to read the prophets and the book of Psalms, and even I'm reading right now the book of Job in Hebrew, those are the ones. So God does not ever command child sacrifice. And even here, people have said, well, you believe in a God who commanded child sacrifice. No, I don't. He did not command child sacrifice. Why did God do this? It had nothing to do with child sacrifice. It had everything to do to prepare Abraham as the father of this faith and Isaac as the promised child, the Akid, to from this day forth be the 2 greatest evangelists of the Old Testament by passing this story on to their kids and their kids and their kids, the truth about what was going to come. God would provide a sacrifice on this mountain. The Lord will provide. Only when you walk in the shoes of Abraham, who thought he had to sacrifice his 13-year-old son, or however old Isaac is, for 3 days, and then be spared from doing that. And only Isaac, who thought his dad was going to kill him by the command of God, and then be spared by that. And then to have God provide the ram as a whole burnt offering, only those 2 could have been transformed in an incredible way like nobody else. And only those 2 on Good Friday, April the 3rd, 33 AD, when Jesus hung on a cross at the command of Pontius Pilate and Joseph Caiaphas, in front of a huge crowd, only could Abraham and Isaac look down from the throne of God and truly feel what God felt, as he did not withhold his right from slashing, from stabbing, from slaughtering his son, his perfect son, his only begotten son, his beloved son, for the sins of the world. And so that's why this story is so important. It's nothing about child sacrifice. It's nothing. So when God says, now I know that you fear God, it has nothing to do that God didn't know. God knows everything. It's sort of like in the Tower of Babel story, God says, let me go down and see. God already knew what they were doing, but it's sort of this, it brings sort of God to be a little more personal, that he sees and knows, and sort of tests, and there's a dialogue going on. And what does God know? That Abraham does fear God. That when God speaks, yeah, he laughs at that idea that he's going to have a kid, but he believed it, and it was credited to him as righteousness. And here God speaks, and he doesn't laugh. He is crying on the inside, you can tell. He fears God. And this is a huge theme from here on out. Those who fear God, that's the beginning of wisdom. That's in the Proverbs. I'm going to pause here. I was just reading Job. In fact, I think Mason V, good old fourth year, I texted you this the other night. I saw this. Job 28. Job 28, verse 28. Easy to remember, 28. If you like the number 28, put Job in front of it. God says to man, behold, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom, and to turn away from evil, that is understanding. So that idea of fearing, loving, and trusting God, which Luther sort of uses in the Catechism, it's this stream of theology all throughout the Old Testament. When we fear God, it's not like we walk as the people did back in the 1500s, out thinking a boulder is going to fall out of the sky and kill us, fear of God. But it's a fear of God of we revere him. And yeah, we do have a holy sense of fear in awe that this God is holy and righteous and we are not. And for him to take care of our sins with the sacrifice and slaughtering of his son, well, you have to interpret every passage in the Bible in light of that. So if you want to claim that God's unfair, that God doesn't care, that God doesn't see, he will see to it. He sees everything. He cares about everyone. Whether, no matter what, creed, race, tongue, political party, skin color, God cares about, in fact, in the book of Jonah, he ends it with, not only does he care about the Ninevites, who are wicked people, he cares about the cattle. He cares about birds. Even Jesus says that. If he will not let one sparrow fall and not know about it, if he cares for the earth that don't harvest or build barns, how much more will he care for you? So this is the God we have. And so when people want to put God on the call God to trial and put him on the witness seat, they better realize who they're calling to be the witness. And again, as I read Job right now, that's really the whole crux of that book. Because you have these, Job is suffering, he doesn't know why, he's asking God these questions. And these three friends who think they know everything. And they pretty much say Job is suffering because he's sinned somehow. And when God finally speaks from the whirlwind, a booming voice, he pretty much says, who are you to question me? Were you there when I created everything? Were you there when I told the waters to stop? Were you there when the Orion was created and Pleiades or whatever those constellations and stars are? Were you there when I did all that stuff? No, you weren't. So who are you to question me? And then on top of that, that's a sort of divine power and creation, glory type thing. Then you have a God who calls this test into play just to show us what he's going to go through by killing his son for the sins of the world. Who are we to question God? What have we sacrificed for the world? Verse 15, and the angel of the Lord called Abraham a second time from heaven and said, by myself, I swear. So this is Jesus again calling from heaven. I swear by myself, declares Yahweh, because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, which again is not his only son, but it's the Akid, the only son of the promise. I will surely bless you, and I will surely multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven and as the sand that is on the seashore. And your offspring shall possess the gate of his enemies, and in your offspring all nations of the earth will be blessed. That is the key. Because you have obeyed my voice. So Abraham returned to his young men, and they arose and went together to Beersheba, back to Beersheba, the south part of the land of Israel, very dry, arid place. That's why they had to dig wells in Beersheba. It means well of the swear or well of the oath, which is fitting because God just swore to him. And now Abraham's going back to a well of the swear. And Abraham lived at Beersheba. I'm going to end there because the next couple verses, while they might be boring to you, are rather interesting. And I'll just give you this hint. Look up Uz and find out where he is from. Anyways, we will pick up next week. Have a great week. Enjoy the beautiful weather. And continue to grow in your faith during this Lenten season by being in the Word and praying often. Take care.